Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm really good. Really excited to have you on. I actually have been looking forward to this, and I had two appointments before this, and I just have been like itching to get here.
Yay.
Yeah. So for our listeners who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself really quick, and then we will start chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Madison Tyler, and I am a pediatric dietitian as my profession. I've been doing that for 11 years, and I am also a mom, married, Brayden, and I have two girls. They're amazing. They're 9 and 10 years old, and they came to our family through adoption. And yeah, we've been foster parents and also adoptive parents for seven. We started our foster care journey 7 years ago.
Okay.
So yeah, here we are.
Yeah. And are you still practicing or you're starting your own business, aren't you?
Yes, yes. So
Yeah.
I worked in the clinical field for in the hospital setting for my whole career. So for
Okay.
11 years. And then just in May, the end of May, just it was my lifestyle was just really crazy. And I wanted to
Mhm.
spend more time with my kids. And even before I wanted to work less, I just had this, like you said, so many families talk about nutrition and
Mhm.
worry about nutrition for their kids, especially in the context of kids with hard histories and
Mhm.
foster and adoptive families. I would hear this a lot, and I just thought I would love to help them in
Mhm.
some capacity, but my plate was always so full. I was working full time and was trying to give any extra time I had to my kids. Um, but anyway, it just ended up where it just really was God leading me into this work that's,
Mhm.
allows me to help others. It also allows me to be home more. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I have just been giving kind of free, helpful information so far. But
Okay.
in the future, I hope to offer some services to really work with people one on one as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so needed. So I'm excited for you. I'll be rooting you on from over here.
Yay, thanks.
Yeah. So you also are homeschooling, right? Did I read that?
Yes, you
Yeah.
did read that. Yes. So that was
So,
also one of the things that I was like, okay, maybe it is time for me to let go of my full-time career. So I said I would never homeschool. Not
yeah.
that there's
Don't
any,
we all?
I've always admired it. I've
Yep.
always thought that would be so great. I wish I could do that for my
Yep.
kids, but I
Yep.
said, I can't. I'm not gifted at teaching. I don't have
Mhm.
the skills. But just really around the time that I kind of felt like I needed to leave my job and start this new endeavor to help foster and adoptive families with nutrition. I was also just noticing like my kids need extra help.
Mhm.
And, at the end of a long school day, it's really, really hard and
Yeah.
exhausting to
Oh my
give
gosh.
and for to expect them to sit and you reteach them
Yeah.
everything. And it wasn't helpful.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of other little things too that I just looked like, okay, I think the answer is homeschooling.
Mhm.
And I think, other people have made it work and,
You can
I
do
just
it.
have to trust that,
Yeah.
we'll make it work. So we're trying it out. It's our first time. They're third and fifth grade.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're going to try it for a year and
Okay.
hopefully it can be more than that, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. We have done homeschool off and on depending on the needs of our
Okay.
kids.
Yeah.
And so you can do it. It really is not as hard as you see from the outside. You look at people and be
Yes.
like, I wish I could do that. You can do
Okay. Thank you
it.
for the encouragement. Yes, I've talked to
Yeah.
several other homeschool moms and it's given me the confidence
Yeah.
to like just step out in faith. And I don't want to, I don't want to look back one day and say, what if I had tried? I'm like, I'll
Yeah.
just try. And if we fail, it's at least we can say we tried.
Yeah. But it
So
won't be a fail. It'll be a learning,
that's true.
right? Right?
True.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. It will be an experience. And if anything, I get all this extra time with my kids that I've
That's right.
never otherwise would have, which
Yeah.
that's never in vain. So
Yeah, totally. That's exciting. Well,
yeah.
I'll be cheering for you on that too.
Thank
So
you.
look
It's
at
good to
me.
know that you've also
Yeah.
homeschooled. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Okay.
Yeah.
I might have to reach out for
You
some
can
pointers.
totally. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Okay, well, I would love to talk about nutrition and all of that, but I kind of feel like my audience needs to hear a little bit of your story about how did you get into
Sure.
foster care and go down the path of adoption as much as you want to share.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So really before my husband and I were even married, I mean, we both loved kids.
Hmm.
Um, and we just had a heart for orphan care, just knowing that there were kids in the world who didn't have families. We both grew up in a two-parent household, never had to worry about, really anything. I mean, we always
Hmm.
had food to eat and, we were loved and cared for. And we just knowing there were other kids that didn't have that.
Hmm.
In our hearts, before we got married, we both agreed like adoption is going to be something that we want to both pursue
Okay.
together.
Okay.
And in our minds, it's like, oh, we'll do that when we're older. Because we got married fairly young. We were 24.
Okay.
Um, and we knew it cost a lot of money. So we were like, okay, we got to wait until we have more money and we'll pursue that one day. And in the meantime, we'd only been married for a couple of years. And I remember talking with a friend and she asked me like, what would be my dream job? And I just said something about working, with orphans. And she was like, have you ever thought about foster care? And I was like, no, actually, I haven't, because I really didn't know anything about it. I mean, I
Yeah.
hadn't heard much about it growing up. And, you know, it's just easy to think of the global orphan crisis and forget that it's actually like happening
Here.
right in our neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started reading about it and learning more about it. And it was around the same time there was a lot of things coming out in the media about Planned Parenthood, and there was a
Mm,
lot of controversy online. And I remember reading an article that really, really just transformed my thinking about, if we say that we support life and um, we have to be more than just pro-birth.
mm-hmm.
And, you know, once these families choose life for their children, and then they can't take care of them for whatever reason, if they have mental health problems or financial problems or addiction problems, or they don't have support, how are we now helping them? They've
Mm-hmm.
given life to this child and now they don't have any help. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh. And it wasn't like a feeling of guilt, like, oh, I have to do that. It was like almost freeing, like, this is the answer. This is how, we can support families that need help now. And there are these precious lives that are
Mm-hmm.
just hanging kind of in a limbo. They need, and these, birth families that need support and help. And so one thing led to another. We started fostering. So that was because that a financial, was not a financial commitment. And so
Yeah.
that was 3 years into our marriage.
Okay.
We started fostering and then ended up, it really took about 6 years to adopt one of our children who came to us first through foster care. But
Okay.
she was, a part of our family for that full 6 years, really.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but we were able to finally finalize her adoption actually last year.
Oh,
And
wow.
then, yes, and then during that process, we did feel, foster care is very much about family reunification, and
Yeah.
we were able to send many kids to their families and
Yeah.
have
Support that.
relationships with
Hmm.
them and support that. And it's been very, very, it's just been really sweet to witness and be a part of. But we
Yeah.
also felt the need, we really wanted to grow our family through adoption. And we did know, globally, there's an orphan crisis and kids who do not have any living parents or any parents that
Hmm.
they will ever be able to be reunified with. And so so yeah, we started the process to adopt from India,
Okay.
and that was in 2018. And we were supposed to bring her home in the summer of 2020, our daughter. Of course, COVID
Okay.
happened.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, that pushed it back. We brought her home in January of 22. So, she's
Oh,
been home a little over 2 years. Yes. So,
wow.
yeah, she was 7 when we brought her home.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but yeah, I think that, I mean, I could probably talk about
Totally. Yeah.
that for literally hours and hours, but
Yeah.
that's probably the shortest version I can
Yeah.
give.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it through that journey that that's when you learned about TBRI?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Really through foster care. So
Okay.
actually, I remember going to my very first Empowered to Connect is what the conference used to be
Yes.
called. And
Yep.
now I think, and now it's Hope for the Journey.
Hmm.
We went in, I think it was like in May, and we got our first foster placement in July. So we actually had some training before we
Before.
ever
That's
had a
great.
child in our home, which was such a gift. I
Yep.
mean, looking back, I would have probably just quit and been like, I don't know how to do this if I
Hmm.
hadn't had any of that. And then, of course, I've been to it several times, and every time I
Yeah.
go, I always
You
learn
learn something
something
new.
new.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
It's so helpful.
Well, and I'm curious just because we are talking about TBRI, I promise we're going to talk about nutrition. But is there something with TBRI that you just feel like if you could tell anyone this one or two things or like just do this piece.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I mean, it's all about connection-based
Yeah.
parenting. And, of course, I named my business Nourish with Connection because I
Yep.
really believe that connection is the foundation to any healthy relationship and really any healthy individual. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much research coming out, and it has, been coming out, but even more so now about just the value of human connection and human
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And then just knowing that our kids have had these severed
Mm-hmm.
connections and broken relationships, and they need that so much more. So I guess just knowing, whatever you're facing, whether it's behaviors or, you know, worries or fears, like just if you can, whatever you're trying to teach your child, like making sure they know that you care, that you're doing this to help grow closer to them and not
Mm-hmm.
because, you want to have control over them or
Yeah.
because, whatever the other motives that we sometimes have are, like just to try to let those things go, and really focus on connection. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. That's a really broad answer. I'm trying to think some of the most helpful things, really getting on your child's level, like instead of when there is a behavior or some defiance or disobedience, instead of just immediately being, opposed, it's like, let's the playful engagement. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know you're not really doing, it just totally changes the mood because as soon as you're on the defensive, then they have to stay
They're on
on
the
the
yeah.
the opposite side, and it just creates this, so even something as simple as like turning it and being kind of playful and not showing how much it affects your nervous
Yeah.
system and your emotions, like it helps them to stay more
Diffuse it.
regulated
Hmm.
and diffuse
Totally.
that
Yeah.
just so quickly. So it would be really hard to pick just a couple of things. There's
Yeah.
like so many things. I mean, I
Yeah.
literally could not continue to be, a foster parent or adoptive parent if it weren't for TBRI.
Yeah.
And I really feel like it's useful for any
It
parent. I mean,
is. Yeah.
regardless of
Yeah.
your child's history, for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and so how does TBRI kind of intermingle with your knowledge of nutrition as a dietitian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it intermingles so much, and that's why I
Mhm.
wanted to start sharing this with people. I think so many times parents are so concerned about their child's health. We know that
Yeah.
ACEs, adverse childhood events, increase health risks.
Yep.
So it increases cardiovascular risks, it increases, their all these things. And so I think some of us as parents already have this pressure
Mhm.
of, or whether even their child has, mental health history, in their families. We have all this pressure of like, oh, we've got to make sure they're healthy because they're already at risk. And I think sometimes that pressure, really it creates more stress because then
Yeah.
we think, oh, they can't keep eating, you know, chips and candy and all these things. Like they've got to get more vegetables because I know how much they need it for, their long-term health. And then it just causes this tension in the relationship and it
Yeah.
breaks that connection. And
Yeah.
that connection is actually, I really believe, based on everything that I've read and learned, is really the foundation. Like if you
Mhm.
don't have that connection, then whether they're eating healthfully or not, it doesn't really matter. And
Mhm.
there's all this research to show too that stress, it can decrease appetite, can actually even impair your ability to absorb nutrients.
Oh, interesting.
Um, and so it's like you're almost defeating the purpose,
Yeah.
if you're
Right.
just eat this, eat
Eat,
this, eat this, like
eat this
take one
carrot,
bite.
but it's not even going to
Yes,
absorb.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like you're not going to get all the benefits. And then of
Yeah.
course we know chronic stress, if they're nervous to come to the table because they're going to be expected to eat their whole plate, or because
Yeah.
they can't get dessert if they don't eat their vegetable, and that's going to cause really chronic stress. And
Yeah.
that's the one thing that we know we really need to try to minimize as much as possible, because our kids have already had so much stress, and that causes so much inflammation and affects
Hmm.
our health. And so, yeah, just knowing, okay, I want every family to know like the foundation is always connection. Like
Hmm.
that has to be the foundation. And then that gives you the opportunity to build on. I'm not saying never encourage your kids to eat
Right.
vegetables and to not prioritize health. Of course, I love nutrition and I'm passionate about it. But your kid has to be ready for it. They
Yeah.
have to have felt safety. They have to trust you. They have to be curious and want to try the
Yeah.
things and feel safe to like it or dislike it.
Not
They
like
have to
it.
feel
Hmm.
safe to say, I don't really like this. No, thank you.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that's ultimately, I guess, just bringing that, knowing how important connection and trauma informed care is, knowing how important nutrition is, but just really wanting to elevate, connection over the other. And
Yeah.
then knowing as you have this foundation, then this one is going to come with time. And for some kids, it happens quickly. And for other
Yeah.
kids, it could happen years. It could take
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
um, but I really want to help promote, connection. And there's ways you can do that with family meals and, making sure you're really attuned to your child and
Hmm.
being present, with them rather than you go eat over there at that meal. We're
Yeah.
going to have ours over here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so one thing that I want to touch on is when, I think about how this is important for all of our kids, right? Not just our kids who
Yeah.
have experienced adversity. But here's what I hear though is like with, I can remember with my biological kids when so we adopted last. So our youngest child is adopted and the other are biological. And I can remember having them take no thank you bites, and it wasn't a big deal. It was like they would try a bite, and if they didn't like it, then we wouldn't make them eat it, and we moved on with our lives, right?
Yeah.
With our son, we couldn't do that. And we still haven't gotten to the point where well, sometimes we can, but it is hit or miss because
Yeah.
it's different. It's like if
Mm-hmm.
we try and say, take a no thank you bite, that can immediately lead to like this battle, this power
Yeah.
struggle, right? That it's like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not even worth it. So I'm not even going to have you
Right.
do a no thank you bite. Like it's on the
Right.
plate. If you want to smell it, great. If you don't, okay.
Yes.
And I think that's where it's like this information is good for everybody, but there is that
Absolutely.
added layer of being aware of the history of the child because
Mhm.
sometimes we have to adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
the hard part about being foster and adoptive parents is that sometimes we don't know the history.
Yeah.
They're we don't know if they've ever been food insecure, or if they've sometimes we know and
Sometimes we
sometimes
do.
we
Yeah.
don't. And then we don't know what experience maybe they had with, a banana, or like
Hmm.
just some smell of even a food.
Hmm.
Like could
Yeah.
be they were smelling that food on the day that they were taken from their house.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things that we don't know. And so to even if you're doing it in the most polite way possible, like a no thank you bite, like we have no idea. And so it's
Hmm.
always best to just assume like there's a reason for that behavior. And at the end of the day, like you said, it's not worth the stress that it creates. Is it
Hmm.
really going to be that helpful for my child to take one bite of
Hmm.
this food? So yeah, you're
Right.
absolutely right.
Yeah. Can we talk about like kiddos? I mean, I just, so I've worked in child welfare for a long time, way too many years, 18 years before I started this. But what I see a lot is kiddos who have been drug exposed that then have feeding
Mm,
issues, right? And end up with
yeah,
a G tube or maybe not that extreme, but there's still like bad reflux and,
yeah,
feeding therapy and all
absolutely.
of that. So how does that play into all of this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we know that kids who have had any kind of medical history, NICU,
Yep.
um, or any kind of injuries or just gastrointestinal issues like reflux, they are at a much higher risk of having a feeding disorder, whether
Mhm.
it's, you know, just a restricted, feeding disorder, like they only want certain foods, or it could be textures, or like you said, certain foods may cause reflux more
Mhm.
often. They could have certain food sensitivities or food allergies. But yeah, all those experiences then create this negative association with
Mhm.
food. And so it's very psychological, and
Mhm.
it can be very challenging to overcome. And of course, in those more extreme, if we're not just talking about just kind of normal picky eating, then
Yeah.
of course, the family needs to seek, feeding therapy with a specialized speech therapist, a dietitian, preferably ones that are trained in trauma-informed
Yeah, trauma
care.
informed. Very
But
important. Yeah.
it is so important, and sometimes it's hard to find,
Mhm.
because I have heard really negative stories where they're forced to take tastes or smells or bites of things, and it really backfires. I mean, it makes,
Mhm.
you take one step forward and then you end up taking three steps backwards.
Yeah.
So that can make that whole process of, if they are feeding tube dependent, it can make that process of transitioning so much longer. Um, so yeah, it's more common than we realize.
Mhm.
And again, it just depends on the experience of the child. And I've seen this, in friends of mine who with biological children
Yeah.
who've been in the
Yeah.
NICU.
You're right.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's can be very common. So just trying to be patient with your child and realizing that there are either psychological reasons for this, or even just like, anatomical, like it could
Yeah.
just be, you know, there could be something physically in their body that is making feeding a lot more challenging. So just making sure parents are really good advocates for their kids. And if
Mhm.
they do, if they're in therapy, feeding therapy, or whatever recommendations they've had from the pediatrician, just making sure they're letting their pediatrician, or I mean, the pediatrician should surely know, but even the other care team members involved, like what is the child's full history? At
Mhm.
least in what's necessary for them to know. Of course, there's some things that are not necessary, but just, hey, my child may have had a bad experience with food. I'm not sure. And so I really want to make sure we're approaching this in a trauma informed way. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, do you have another provider that you can
Yeah, that's good.
recommend?
Mhm. Just
Um,
being upfront with
so
that.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
then, like I said, just really being patient with your children, and still including them in the mealtime.
Mhm.
So actually, I used to work primarily with kids for almost a decade that had cancer. And so we had a lot of my patients did require feeding tubes.
Okay.
But it was still really important for them to be at the table
Mhm.
with the family, even if your child isn't going to eat, or you don't think they're going to eat, just like really make the focus of meal times about connecting with each
Yeah.
other, having conversations about your day. And some kids, that can even be really stressful. So maybe like not asking them that, but just even silly questions like,
Mhm.
okay, if you could be any animal,
Yeah. Yeah.
what would it be and why? And just like trying to make it as comfortable as possible and not focusing on the food.
Yeah.
And then that just helps that child become more comfortable around. Even though if they're not eating it, they're participating in it, they're watching other people eat it and enjoy it, and it feels safe. And
Yeah.
so with time, hopefully then, oh, maybe I want to try it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try that. And so just having that positive, just making all associations with food as positive as possible,
Mhm.
just continues to build on each other and help.
Yeah.
I think I can't remember what
Totally.
your full
No,
question
you're
was. I hope I
good.
answered it.
No, you're good. I think the other thing too that I'm thinking about is we're talking a lot about like kiddos who maybe have some food aversions, or there's been some stress that then makes them appear to be picky eaters, right? What about the
Yeah.
other end of things though? Like we do see kiddos who were neglected that then like gorge and like hide
Mhm.
food and sneak food and
Yes.
don't even chew. And then we are at risk for like choking because they're just trying to eat
Yes.
so fast. Like, can we
Yeah.
go to that end of things now and talk
Sure.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is I feel like, well, it's not necessarily more common, but it is
Hmm.
very common. And I've experienced that as a foster mom, and witnessed that in other situations, and with patients and clients as well. But it's hard, and it takes time. So our children need to know that they will have food,
Hmm.
and they developing that trust of really being able to rest and knowing, okay, the pantry is never going to be empty. The
Hmm.
refrigerator is never going to be empty. It takes time, and they have to develop just like you and me. I mean, we wouldn't trust, we don't trust strangers with, precious things. Like we have to build, people have to earn our trust. And
Hmm.
so really our kids deserve for us to prove that they can trust us with meeting their needs, their most basic.
Yeah.
And so there's different, practical things that you can do. Like if you notice this behavior in a child, like letting them pick out, some of their favorite non-perishable snacks and
Okay.
just, keeping it in a container somewhere in it. They can even put it in a private place where you don't even, because sometimes they're worried about someone stealing it or
Yeah.
taking it from them. And so just as long as they know, look, that is for you, no one else is allowed to have it. You can have it whenever you need it. And that just kind of helps them, oh, okay, like, so
Hmm.
when I am at the table or in the kitchen, I don't have, that's not my one and only chance to eat. Like,
Hmm.
I actually have this other backup plan in case I do get hungry or in case anything happens. So that's one, practical thing that you can do. And then, when your kids are, when you are at a meal eating and you notice, like, hey, it's okay to, you don't want to, especially not in front of, and it depends on the child. There's
Yeah.
so much of this is so individualized.
Yeah.
And so this may be a conversation that child might be more comfortable having after dinner, just one on one, where, I noticed, you're eating kind of fast. I'm glad you liked it. Like, try not to give them, you don't want to create any shame or
Yeah.
embarrassment, but just acknowledge, like, sometimes when we eat a little bit more slowly, our bodies can feel, we can enjoy the food better, and we can feel when we're fuller better. Sometimes if we eat too fast, we don't notice when we're
Yeah.
full until until we're uncomfortable. And so, not every single time, pointing that out, but just on occasion. And it depends on the age, the age
Hmm.
and developmental age of the child, of course, too. But I mean, the best thing you can do is model
Yeah.
what to do. And again, not make them feel embarrassed or ashamed, but just the more they're at the table with the family,
Yeah. That
seeing
family
how it
dinner.
works,
Hmm.
exactly, seeing how everyone else eats, the more they'll start to kind of, see those social cues and start to learn. And again, the more they have that self safety of knowing, okay, I am gonna get another meal and I am
Hmm.
gonna get a snack. And definitely regular meals and snacks are very, very important. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Can you
a
talk about that?
routine,
Yeah.
sure, sure. Yeah. Definitely all kids thrive on routine,
Hmm.
but especially kids from hard places who need to know, like I said, they need felt safety, they need security. And so knowing, we are always going to have breakfast around, it doesn't have to be
Exact.
so
Yeah.
rigid, right?
Hmm.
But just we always have breakfast around this time every day. And then we have a mid-morning snack around this time. And then we have lunch and then another snack and then dinner. And then we can have an evening snack. And just having that structure and
Hmm.
the more consistent you are, the more their bodies will know, like, oh, yeah, I am going to eat again in a couple hours.
Yeah.
So if it's okay if I don't finish every single thing or I don't have to be so full, I can actually wait for that next meal. And that this could take years. I mean, I have
Yeah.
seen this
Yeah.
take years, and that's hard.
Hmm.
But like I said, consistency and time heals. And so that, just being patient, I think, with your child is the best thing you can do. And like I said, being a good role model, just showing that and always having meals together, and then consistently offering food for them
Yeah.
will help a lot with their security and their ability to start to learn those internal cues. And a lot of our kids, have interoceptive issues where they don't
Yeah.
feel
Right.
hunger or fullness as much. And
Yep.
so those things take time as well. And even sometimes I'll just narrate what I'm doing and feeling out loud. And that kind of starts to help my kids start to think, oh, if I'm eating a delicious dessert and it's like, oh, this is so good. I don't think I can eat another bite though. I'm starting to get full. I don't want to be uncomfortable.
Hmm.
I'm think I'm going to be done. And again, not saying you should be full or you
Yep.
should be done, but
But
just
modeling it.
showing
Yep.
what you do and how you feel and with time, they can start to pick up sometimes on their own internal cues.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you mentioned like an evening snack or a bedtime snack, right? So that's one of the things that there's like pre TBRI, Melissa, and post TBRI, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that like I went back and forth on pre TBRI is like, do we need a bedtime snack? Like, really? Right. But now post TBRI is like, yes, we get a bedtime snack. So can you like expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, hopefully I'll answer, and I guess I would say having, like I said, that's a routine that your
Hmm.
child can expect and rely on, and you're consistent and they have trust, that you're going to provide for them what you say you're going to provide for them. But there may be some days where eventually, and this can take time, where they're like, you know what, I'm good. Like, I'm still full from
Hmm.
dinner. Like,
Yep.
I don't need it. And that's a day when you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing,
Hmm.
especially if it's a child that, had experienced food insecurity and who, had that constant need to always be eating and didn't recognize fullness cues. But yeah, just offering that, I mean, you think about the time when you go to bed, and depending on the age of the child and how long they sleep, that's a long period
That's
of
a long
time to
time.
go
Yeah.
without eating. And sometimes our kids, well, I mean, my kids still, they wake up ravenous. Like,
Yeah.
that's the first thing they
Hangry.
want to do. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And some kids don't wake up hungry, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But it just helps, it just kind of helps regulate them for bedtime.
Hmm.
And then it kind of just helps them have a better start to their day too. But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be anything huge or big. I mean, one of my tips I always give, I feel like, because my, kids tend to crave the little, just some crackers, or just, you know, chips or goldfish, or
Hmm.
these little light, fruit sometimes, which, that's great, but they're not very filling. And
Yeah.
so our kids will be constantly complaining of hunger. And so just pairing it with, some kind of protein or
Hmm.
fat, that just will help it's more satiating and more satisfying, and it will help them stay a little bit fuller longer, help
Yeah.
regulate their blood sugar, instead of just having this, oh, I got some carbs and then
Yep.
now I'm
The
crashing a
dip.
little bit.
Hmm.
And so, and sometimes it could just be milk, like milk with whatever snack.
Hmm.
So it doesn't have to be, and of course, giving your children plenty of choices. So instead of just saying, well, this is what you can have. If you don't want it, you must not be hungry. That's
Yeah.
the start of like
A
a,
battle.
a power
Hmm.
struggle, and
Hmm.
then, feeling the stress of like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna, be able to get what I know I need or what I
Hmm.
want. And so always, I mean, that's one of the TBRI things is like, do you want this or this? Or,
Yep.
one of the whole brain child, I remember learning
Yeah.
that from that, and just helps so much when you offer choices. And of course, make sure the choices include things that your child likes.
Yeah.
Like, if you're like, do you want broccoli or carrots? And they hate both. Like,
Yeah.
that's not very fair. So,
Right? Yeah. Oh
yeah.
my gosh, that's funny. But also true, like how often we do that, right? Um,
Yes.
the other thing I was thinking too when you were talking earlier was about sugar and how often that is a struggle that my families deal with, right? Is their
Mm-hmm.
kiddos craving sugar and like sneaking sugar and
Yeah.
like, yeah, can we talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. It's a popular topic.
Yeah.
It can be very controversial. So the less access you have to something, usually the more you want it. I
Mhm.
mean, and I mean, well, I guess let's start with, kids from hard places often do crave stronger, bolder flavors. This may not be true of every child. I mean,
Yeah.
there could be like children, with a history of NICU stay, or, feeding difficulties, where they really don't like strong
Yeah.
flavors, or even strong textures. They just want bland,
Yep.
soft, smooth things. But then on the reverse, you have a lot of my experience with kiddos has been where they're very much like sensory seekers. And so
Hmm.
they really like the spicy,
Hmm.
salty, sugary, crunchy,
Hmm.
they need that kind of sensory input. And
Hmm.
so strong flavors do that for kids. Um, that doesn't mean they always need to have those flavors, but it also
Right.
means they should be allowed to have those, those things at times.
Yeah.
That helps them regulate.
Hmm.
And so yeah, with that kind of foundation, than just talking about sugar in general. Of course, everybody knows too much sugar is not good, but too much of
Yeah.
anything is not
Is not
good.
good. Yeah.
Exactly. So, always say like if your children know they can't have it, then they're going to want it even more.
Yeah.
And so it's actually a lot of times, and this sounds a little crazy, and if you have a child that is so focused on their dessert or getting their dessert or having that sweet thing, like actually if you serve it with a meal, and I don't mean like a huge giant bowl
Right.
of ice cream, but
Right.
just something, a sweet, satisfying little cookie or whatever it is with the meal, you're not going to serve 10 cookies with the meal, but
Sure.
if each person can have theirs, a lot of times they'll eat it and then they'll realize they're still hungry and they're going to eat the
Go
other
eat the other
foods.
stuff. Yeah.
But then having access to that sweet thing, they're not, whenever it's going to prevent them from overdoing it when they do have access.
Yeah.
It's so sad. I've, witnessed kids who don't normally have access to sugary foods at home, and then they go to a birthday party or a different environment, and it's like they don't know how to
How to
control
stop.
themselves.
Hmm.
And it could, maybe they do have access at home. There's certain situations where I really don't know, but there have been situations where it's because they're restricted from having it, and
Hmm.
so they, just like we talked about with food insecurity, when they have access to food, they don't know if they're ever going to get it again. So it could
Hmm.
be the same with this. It's something that has a little bit of a dopamine release. They
Yeah.
enjoy it.
That's it.
They like that sensory input, and they don't know
Yep.
if they're ever going to get it again. So it's like, I got to have it all right
Yep.
now. But if you can be consistent in saying, like, we're always going to have you know, a sweet treat available for this, you don't have to have one at every meal, of
Right.
course. And it could just be offering, yogurt or fruit. There's other things that have some of
That
those,
are sweet.
yeah, satisfying flavors that you can make them more healthful, or serving them with something, if it could be yogurt with some chocolate chips, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
so they're balancing, and, not offering just that sweet thing, of course.
Hmm.
So, like we mentioned with the carb heavy snacks, sometimes it's just that sugar high and then they drop off. And so if you're offering it with a meal, that
Yeah.
helps prevent that from happening. Or if you're offering it with another food, that also helps them feel more satisfied.
Yeah.
Helps prevent that, that downward sugar crash or whatever afterwards. But yeah, I would just say the more if a parent is concerned that, sugar makes their child hyper or whatever, the more if they use that language in front of their child, then their child is going to believe that.
Yeah.
And, and so I think just trying to realize at the end of the day, a little bit of sugar is not harmful for your
Hmm.
child, and they need to know that it's okay. Like, they don't need to feel guilt. I think the other thing too is, if they were in a different environment before they were in your home, and now you're telling them, oh, those, that junk food and those sweets, all that, that's so unhealthy, that's so bad for you, then they're starting to think, did my caregiver, did they not want what was good
Yeah.
for me? They have
Yeah.
all this
You risk
shame and
that.
this,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, and they may have only had access to a corner gas station, and
And so
maybe
that's all
they,
they had. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and they're trying to feed their child. And so, I mean, there's definitely situations where people can access healthy foods and they don't offer it. But I think in our, with a lot of the families that we work with, and our kids, we don't need to put that shame on them, and they
Yeah.
may even think, oh, but these are the things I like, so the things I like are bad.
Mm.
So I'm definitely one to really neutralize like food
Hmm.
language. Like, really all food can be good
Yeah.
in moderation,
Yeah. I like
and
that.
that's really how I've lived my life. And I feel like I have a really healthy relationship with food. I mean, thankfully I didn't haven't experienced food insecurity and
Yeah.
those things, but I love sweets.
Yeah.
I don't eat it unlimitedly, because I know, like, I can have it when I want it.
Hmm.
And it's okay to enjoy, I want people to, I think we get so hyper focused on, you know, health and doing the right thing, that we kind of miss out on enjoying things
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
and especially for our kids, like, if that's one thing that they enjoy, like, why would you take that from them?
Yeah.
Of course, everyone, there needs to be guidelines. It's not like you should just let them
A
eat a
free
whole
for
box
all.
of
Yeah.
cookies. And yeah, but the
Yeah.
more, and it may take time for them to learn moderation,
Hmm.
but you model it, you show it to them like, oh, let's enjoy some Oreos together. And, and you eat 3 or 2 or whatever, and then you're done. And so
Yeah.
they see, and oh, and it'll be there the next time you want
Hmm.
some.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah. No, that's
I
good.
answered that
Yep.
well. But yeah, if you have other questions about it, I mean, that's a topic that I like talking about because I think it's
Yeah.
so important because you see so I just cringe every time I see something on social media about like, my kids don't eat sugar. And I just
Yeah.
think, oh, but I wonder what they're going to turn out like as
I
an
know.
adult, like, or
Yeah.
even as a teenager when they get
Mhm. Or when they go
when
to
they're not
college.
around you, or when, yes, yes,
Yep.
I just worry about that a lot.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, I appreciate that. And well, and what one thing is I'm going to put in the show notes where to find you. So if people are
sure.
hearing this and have more questions, they can reach out to
Yeah,
you. And
absolutely. Would love
yeah.
that.
So a couple more things and then we're going to wrap up. This went by so fast. I'm like looking at the clock thinking,
Yeah.
I feel like we could keep talking forever, but we can't.
Yeah.
So it's okay.
I know.
I
That's
just
okay.
have two more questions for you. And the first one is, what do you wish more people thought of when it comes to trauma and the relationship with food? And you might have already said this, but kind of just like narrowing this down.
Yeah, yeah. I guess just knowing that it can affect a person's, whether it's a child or an adult, it can definitely affect a person's relationship with food,
Mhm.
having experienced trauma. And you may never know what the experience was or how it directly correlates and affects it, but just knowing that you have a chance to try to mend that, you can either make it better or you can make it worse. And
Mm, mhm.
just trying to suppress anything in you that's thinking like, I have to make sure they're making the right choices. And um well, they couldn't have, I know so much about their history, or even if it's your own child, like if
Mhm.
they haven't experienced something, but maybe they were at daycare
Yeah.
and there was a meal that they had, and it was the same day that they, got accidentally locked out on the playground
You
and
just don't
were
know.
afraid for
Yeah.
their life. You have no idea. And so I guess just being as gracious as you possibly can when it comes
Mhm.
to food, and prioritizing meal times together as a family. I really think any family should do family style meals where
Mhm.
you serve the same meal, and always have at least one thing that your child likes.
Well,
So
yeah.
when I say, don't, if you're only serving, carrots, broccoli, and chicken, and your child doesn't like any of those things, well, that's
Yeah.
not helpful.
Yeah.
And make sure there's mac and cheese or whatever, something that
Something they
they
will
like.
eat. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and then you eat it together, and the more they're exposed, kids need frequent exposure, and they need to be exposed to things in different ways. So,
Mhm.
mixing it up. If they didn't like um, mashed potatoes, we'll try roasted potatoes, or
Mhm. Yeah.
just trying different things, different times, and letting trying to minimize pressure. So, like I said
Yeah.
earlier, like stress causes inflammation, and try to minimize stress at the table as much as possible, especially
Yeah.
for our kids who've experienced trauma. Like just
That's so
try
important.
not to focus on the food,
Mhm.
just focus on being together. And then that will build that foundation of felt safety and connection. And
Yeah.
hopefully with time, they'll be more likely to accept more foods.
Yeah. That's good. Well, and this last question kind of is along the same lines, but 3 resources you would recommend
Yeah.
to our families that are like, yeah, food is a struggle. Like, what do you what would be
Yeah.
3 resources you would recommend?
Well, for sure, there's a book called Love Me, Feed Me.
Yes.
Yes, by Dr. Katia Rowell.
Hmm.
She's a pediatrician and feeding doctor, and she is really focuses on responsive feeding, which I'm a big advocate for. Responsive feeding is basically you respond to what your kid needs.
Okay.
You don't decide when they're full or when they're hungry.
Sure.
Your kid decides when they're full and when they're hungry. And of course, some of them need help with some of those
Yeah.
learning that,
Yeah.
and having those consistent meals and snacks can help with that. But that book is like definitely one of
So
my
good.
favorite books. It
Yeah.
is so good, and anyone can read it. It's not just for, it's really written for foster and adoptive parents.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the
Yeah.
book at all?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's a great resource. Okay, and then what would my other resources be? I mean, I guess I am trying to
Yes.
post, helpful little tips and tidbits on
Your information
Instagram.
is so helpful. I
Okay, thank
enjoy it.
you.
So yes,
Good,
everybody should go find
good.
you.
Yes, thank you. Oh, and I was gonna say, I guess just backtrack a little bit. One of the other things, this can go here too, with tips for meals. And I think you had posted something about this, and I was like, yes, yes, yes. Having like a yes box or
Oh
a
yeah, yeah.
yes jar of snacks or foods where your kids always know, like, yes, you can
It's
have this.
there.
Like, this
Yep.
is available. You can have this. That helps a lot with whether they've had a history of food insecurity, or just like you said, just our kids need more yeses. And
Yeah.
so just having that, I definitely highly recommend. And then I haven't opened it yet, but I will have a website
Okay.
soon. I've been working on my blog, so I'll have a blog which will kind of go into more details, like some of the topics that I discuss on Instagram. I'll have
Yeah.
kind of more details about that, so that could be a helpful
Cool.
resource.
Is
And then
that
of course,
is that the nourishwithconnection.com?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Cool.
it's under construction, but
Sure.
it's close,
We'll still
very
link it
close.
because it'll be
Okay,
there.
perfect.
Yeah.
It'll be there soon. Yes.
Yeah.
And then of course, like any kind of TBRI training. I mean, I can't
Yes.
recommend that highly enough to anyone. And I guess that doesn't really incorporate nutrition so much. But I just think it's so foundational to
Hmm.
knowing how much our kids need connection and felt safety. And then that can just better
It trickles
help.
down. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate all of your knowledge and for taking so much time to talk with me because I know it's going to be really helpful to my listeners. I mean, honestly, I think food comes up almost always with my clients that I'm working with. So in some way. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to give us some pointers
Yeah.
and share
So
your thoughts. So
I'm so happy to. It's obviously I'm very passionate about it. So very
yeah,
happy to help in any way.
awesome. Well,
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you and I will see you
Yeah.
on Instagram.
Sounds great.
Okay,
See
have a
ya.
good day.
You too.